"Wake up, you fools, this isn't a rehearsal." The words echoed in the cool morning air, reverberating off the worn brick of the courthouse as an unexpected visitor dashed through the heavy oak doors. In that charged moment, the courtroom, usually a temple of austere decorum, erupted into a stunned silence. On an ordinary Tuesday in a sleepy Midwestern town, the courthouse had always been a place of routine solemnity. Today, however, its air of measured calm was shattered. A lean, mangy stray dog, its fur a patchwork of dirt and despair, had burst onto the polished floor as if propelled by a force beyond mere instinct. Its eyes, wide with an unspoken plea, darted wildly, searching for solace or perhaps an escape from a harsh world. In that instant, the mundane collided violently with the extraordinary. The trial that had drawn a modest crowd was for a local dispute, a case so routine that even the whispers in the gallery spoke of its insignificance. Judge Harold Whitaker, a man whose reputation was built on unyielding impartiality and measured word, sat imperiously at the bench. His deep-set eyes and weathered features gave nothing away, and his gavel had always been the final arbiter of the law. But nothing in his decades of service had prepared him for the spectacle unfolding before him. As the dog padded awkwardly forward, its ragged breathing punctuated the tense quiet. Some jurors leaned forward, unsure whether to intervene or simply observe this bizarre interruption. Others exchanged uneasy glances, the shift from a well-ordered proceeding to chaotic disbelief sending ripples of uncertainty through the room. The defendant, a middle-aged man with downcast eyes, seemed momentarily liberated from his anxiety, as if the intruder had peeled away layers of human pretense to expose something raw and genuine beneath. Outside, the city streets hummed with the oblivious rhythm of daily life. The courthouse, a relic of a bygone era with its polished marble steps and austere columns, now served as the stage for an unscripted drama that defied the boundaries of legal formality. Only a handful of passers-by had paused, their expressions flickering between curiosity and alarm. One onlooker, a local florist with ink-stained hands and a heart too tender for the cruelty of routine existence, watched as the scene unfolded. In her eyes, the stray was not a mere animal, but a silent symbol of lost hope and the struggle for survival in a world indifferent to the quiet tragedies of its denizens. The stray's sudden appearance was not without consequence. As it bounded along the polished floor, its paws skidding against the cold surface, a symphony of gasps and murmurs filled the room. Even the meticulous court stenographer's fingers faltered above the keys, as if in awe of the disruption. The judge's gavel, once a symbol of unassailable authority, lay momentarily forgotten on the bench, its usual weight replaced by the intangible gravity of an event that transcended ordinary legal proceedings. Judge Whitaker's face, usually an unmoved mask of judicial detachment, betrayed a flicker of something unexpected, a blend of compassion and disbelief. For a heartbeat, his stern composure wavered as he observed the animal's plight. Here was a creature, adrift and unwanted, invading a domain governed by human order and rationality, its presence a raw commentary on the fragility of systems built on rules. In that fleeting second, the courtroom's carefully maintained order dissolved into a turbulent sea of unspoken questions and painful reflections. Behind the bench, the prosecutor and defense attorney exchanged glances, their practiced rhetoric and legal posturing rendered impotent by the absurdity of the situation. The case, which until then had been a mundane exercise in legal procedure, now assumed a surreal quality. Every whispered conversation, every exchanged look, spoke of an unacknowledged truth, that life, with all its chaos and unpredictability, could not be neatly contained within the sterile walls of justice. The stray, driven by instincts that belied its battered appearance, continued its determined advance. Its fur, clinging to its frail frame like tattered remnants of dignity, shimmered briefly in the morning light streaming through the tall, arched windows. The contrast was stark, a living embodiment of vulnerability and resilience set against a backdrop of institutional rigidity. The dog's every move was a silent protest against a world that often ignored the suffering of its most vulnerable citizens, be they human or animal. As the initial shock began to subside, a murmur of sympathy arose among some of the courtroom attendees. Even those who had entered with hardened hearts found themselves softened by the stray's desperate, uncomprehending eyes. The tension in the room was palpable, a fragile balance between duty and the unyielding call of empathy. The stray's presence was an uninvited reminder of the unpredictability of life and the often arbitrary divisions between order and chaos. In the hushed corners of the courtroom, memories of past injustices and personal losses seemed to stir. An elderly juror, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, recalled a time when her own heart had been as raw and exposed as the creature before her. A young man in the gallery, disillusioned by the unrelenting grind of urban life, saw in the stray a metaphor for his own journey, an unmoored existence navigating the perilous currents of indifference and neglect. Outside the courthouse, the world moved on, unaware of the profound moment unfolding within. The steady hum of traffic, the distant laughter of children playing in a nearby park, and the rhythmic tapping of rain against window panes created a counterpoint to the extraordinary scene inside. It was as if the universe, in its infinite wisdom, had orchestrated a moment where the boundaries between the everyday and the exceptional blurred, where the stray's silent testimony to survival resonated with the buried hopes of every onlooker. Within this confined space, where the tangible and the intangible converged, the stray's journey had only just begun. Its sudden incursion had not only disrupted the sanctity of the courtroom, but had also ignited a spark of collective introspection. Each person present was forced to confront a truth that lay dormant beneath the surface of their daily routines, that even in the midst of meticulously organized order, life's inherent chaos could shatter the facade of normalcy with ruthless precision. Judge Whitaker, gathering himself with a measured dignity that belied the turbulence in his heart, slowly rose from the bench. His voice, when it came, was heavy with the weight of unsaid apologies and a deep-seated understanding of the fragile human and animal condition. He spoke not as an arbiter of law, but as a witness to the unpredictable nature of fate, a fate that had chosen, in that singular moment, to remind everyone present of the ever-present dance between order and entropy. The stray paused near the center of the room, its eyes meeting those of the judge. In that silent exchange, there was a profound recognition of mutual vulnerability, a wordless communion that transcended the confines of language and legal decorum. It was as if, for a heartbeat, the rigid boundaries that separated man from beast dissolved into a shared, unspoken understanding of life's precarious balance. The murmurs in the courtroom grew louder, charged with a mixture of awe, sorrow, and an almost palpable sense of solidarity. The stray's presence had become a mirror reflecting the collective struggles of those within the room. It was a symbol of the overlooked and the abandoned, of lives marked by hardship yet fueled by a relentless will to endure. And in that mirror, every person saw not just the scars of their own past, but the potential for renewal, a chance to rebuild the shattered fragments of a world too long resigned to despair. As the morning unfolded, the stray dog's unexpected intrusion continued to ripple through the proceedings. The case was momentarily set aside, and the courtroom transformed into a space where legal formalities bowed before the raw, unfiltered emotion of the moment. Even the most hardened cynics found themselves momentarily disarmed, their defenses crumbling in the face of the stray's silent, poignant protest. In that surreal confluence of events, the stray had not come to disrupt justice, but to reclaim a fragment of it, a justice that recognized the inherent dignity of all living beings, regardless of their status or appearance. The courthouse, with its high ceilings and solemn decor, had become a microcosm of the world outside, a world where moments of unexpected beauty and heart-wrenching despair coexisted in a delicate, often painful equilibrium. As the stray lingered near the judge's bench, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted from one of bewilderment to one of tentative hope. The silence that had once been heavy with apprehension was now imbued with the possibility of transformation, a promise that even the most rigid institutions could be touched by the unpredictable grace of life. The judge, with his gaze fixed on the forlorn creature, felt the weight of years lift ever so slightly from his shoulders. In that fleeting instance, he was not merely a dispenser of verdicts, but a man moved by the raw force of compassion. The echoes of that singular moment would linger long after the stray had vanished from sight, reverberating in the hearts and minds of those who had borne witness. For in the quiet rebellion of one small, battered dog lay a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a reminder that, beneath the veneer of civilization, there beat an unquenchable desire for connection, for empathy, and for the acknowledgement of life in all its imperfect glory. In the days that followed, whispers of the incident spread through the town like wildfire. Neighbors recounted the tale with a mix of incredulity and admiration, their voices tinged with the bittersweet recognition of life's unpredictable twists. The courthouse, once a symbol of impersonal authority, was now etched in local law as the place where a stray dog had silently dismantled the barriers between duty and humanity. And though the legal proceedings resumed with a semblance of normalcy, the memory of that morning remained a quiet, persistent echo, a reminder that justice, in its truest form, is not measured solely by laws and verdicts, but by the capacity to see and feel the fragile pulse of life. The stray, for its part, disappeared as quietly as it had arrived. It was seen wandering the back alleys of the town in the days that followed, its presence a haunting reminder of the fleeting moments of beauty that often emerge in the midst of chaos. Yet, even as it roamed the streets, the impact of its brief sojourn within the courthouse lingered, a silent beacon of empathy in a world too often hardened by routine and indifference. The morning's events had transformed the courthouse into more than a building of stone and mortar. It had become a canvas upon which the raw emotions of a community were vividly painted. The stray's unplanned intrusion had peeled back the layers of complacency, revealing the undercurrent of shared humanity that pulsed beneath even the most stoic facades. And as the judge prepared to return to his duties, his eyes held a quiet sorrow mingled with a glimmer of hope, a hope that perhaps, in the wake of chaos, a more compassionate order might someday emerge. In that brief interlude of shattered routine and unscripted humanity, every heart in the courtroom had been laid bare. The stray had reminded them that life, in all its unpredictable brutality, also carried the seeds of redemption and renewal. And so, as the day advanced and the courthouse gradually resumed its place in the tapestry of daily life, the memory of that extraordinary morning endured, a testament to the strange, beautiful interplay of order and chaos, of law and the unyielding pulse of the living world. The shockwave from that surreal morning had not yet settled in the town. In the aftermath, the stray's silent rebellion had sparked a quiet but undeniable shift, a ripple that spread far beyond the courthouse walls. As the first hints of dusk began to filter through the heavy clouds over the town, the stray moved with a purpose born not of malice but of necessity. Its paws, calloused from endless wanderings, carried it into the labyrinthine alleys that snaked through a quiet residential district, a stark contrast to the stark institutional austerity of the courthouse. In one narrow street, lined with time-worn brick facades and modest front gardens, the stray found itself pausing beneath a flickering street lamp. The light cast long, wavering shadows that danced across cracked sidewalks and overgrown hedges. Here, the pace of life slowed to a contemplative murmur. A solitary figure emerged from one of the houses, a middle-aged woman, her hands trembling slightly as she clutched a well-worn purse. Her eyes, red from days of silent grieving, caught sight of the stray. In that instant, the dog's presence evoked an echo of personal loss, a reminder of memories too painful to forget, and a glimmer of hope that perhaps compassion could still be found in the least expected places. Unspoken understanding passed between them. The stray, though wary, sensed the woman's gentle resolve, while she, in turn, saw in its hollow gaze the mirror of her own forgotten resilience. As if drawn by a mutual, unspoken covenant, she knelt on the uneven pavement and offered a small scrap of bread, a humble offering that resonated like a precious treasure amid the harsh realities of a life marked by loss. The dog approached cautiously, its eyes flickering with the light of suspicion and tentative trust. In that quiet act of kindness, the ordinary transformed into a moment of profound human connection, a reminder that even in a world dictated by cold routines, there remained space for empathy and tenderness. But while this tender exchange unfolded in one corner of the town, other parts of the community were beginning to stir with unrest. The courthouse, now a repository of memories and hushed conversations, had become the epicenter of a broader debate about justice and compassion. Within its austere walls, the reverberations of that morning's intrusion were discussed in whispered tones during subsequent sessions. Local officials, once indifferent to the plight of the overlooked, now found themselves grappling with questions that went far beyond legal statutes. Was justice solely about the impartial execution of the law, or did it also demand an acknowledgement of the raw human and animal suffering that lurked beneath the surface? At a small, crowded cafe not far from the courthouse, a group of regulars huddled together over steaming mugs of coffee. Their conversation, animated and layered with both cynicism and hope, centered on the uncanny events of the day. Among them was a retired schoolteacher whose gentle yet resolute voice painted vivid pictures of a time when empathy was woven into the very fabric of community life. He recalled days when the courthouse, with its imposing columns and ritualistic proceedings, had been a sanctuary of moral clarity rather than a sterile stage for legal battles. His words resonated deeply with the others, igniting a collective yearning for a return to a simpler, more compassionate order, a world where the boundaries between duty and humanity were not so sharply drawn. As twilight deepened into the inkiness of night, the stray moved again, this time toward the modest park on the edge of town. The park, with its meandering pathways and clusters of ancient oak trees, had long been a place where the town's inhabitants sought refuge from the pressures of daily life. Tonight, however, it would bear witness to an unfolding drama that defied the expectations of both human and animal worlds. The stray entered the park with a measured caution, as if aware that the night itself held secrets waiting to be revealed. In a secluded corner of the park, beneath a gnarled oak whose branches stretched like silent sentinels against the darkening sky, the stray encountered another solitary soul. A young man, his eyes distant and burdened with quiet despair, sat on a weathered bench. His presence, incongruous with the typically vibrant energy of the park, spoke of battles fought in silence, battles that left invisible scars on his spirit. As the stray paused a few feet away, the young man's gaze met the creature's. There was an unspoken acknowledgement, a subtle exchange of mutual understanding that bridged the chasm of loneliness and alienation. For a long while, the pair sat together in silence, the young man lost in his thoughts, and the stray, its ears pricked as if listening for the murmurs of a hidden truth. The cool night air carried with it the faint scent of rain and the rustle of leaves, creating an atmosphere thick with introspection. In that shared solitude, the young man found his defenses softening. The stray, embodying the raw authenticity of life on the fringes, seemed to whisper a quiet promise that even in the darkest moments, a spark of light could emerge, however fleeting it might be. The encounter did not go unnoticed. In a modest apartment overlooking the park, a local journalist sat hunched over a cluttered desk, her pen scratching feverishly across a notepad. For weeks, she had been searching for a story that transcended the banalities of local news, a narrative that captured the heartbeat of a community on the brink of rediscovering its lost compassion. When word of the courthouse incident reached her, she sensed that it was only the beginning of a much larger tale. Now, as she pieced together fragments of overheard conversations and glimpses of poignant interactions, she felt a rising urgency to document the unraveling tapestry of emotions that was weaving its way through the town. Her report, composed with both journalistic precision and a poetic sensitivity, sought to capture the essence of that day, the shock, the raw vulnerability, and the quiet acts of kindness that had ignited a silent revolution. Every detail, from the stray's ragged fur glistening under the street lamp's glow to the tear-streaked faces of those who had witnessed its quiet defiance, was etched into her narrative. She envisioned a future where this story would serve not only as a chronicle of a singular event but as a mirror reflecting the enduring human spirit, a spirit capable of rising above the confines of routine and institutional rigidity. As the night deepened, the town seemed to pulse with a new, unspoken rhythm. The stray, guided by an instinct as ancient as time itself, moved once more, its path illuminated by the intermittent glow of streetlights and the gentle shimmer of a distant moon. It made its way back through winding streets, retracing steps that had led it to the courthouse earlier that day, as if compelled by an unseen force to revisit the epicenter of its own quiet revolution. Back at the courthouse, the remnants of the day's extraordinary events lingered like delicate aftershocks. The building, bathed in the cool glow of emergency lights and the muted conversations of night shift custodians, had transformed from a symbol of cold authority into a repository of shared memories and emerging possibilities. The judge, long after his moment of raw vulnerability, sat alone in his chambers. The weight of his responsibilities had not diminished, but within him, a subtle transformation was underway. The stray's unexpected intrusion had stirred emotions long buried beneath layers of procedural detachment. As he gazed at the framed photograph of his late mentor on the wall, he felt a quiet resolve settle within him, a commitment to view the law not as an impenetrable fortress of order, but as a living, breathing mechanism capable of adaptation, compassion, and growth. The night unfolded with a surreal blend of quiet introspection and subtle restlessness, a juxtaposition of the timeless rhythms of nature and the hurried pulses of human hearts. In one fleeting moment, the stray paused beneath a narrow alleyway, its eyes reflecting the scattered luminescence of neon signs from a nearby diner. There, amid the hum of conversation and the clatter of dishes, a brief flash of recognition passed between the dog and a young waitress. Her life, marked by the routine grind of long shifts and unfulfilled dreams, found a mirror in the animal's haunted gaze. It was as if, in that transient glance, both understood that the world was capable of both great cruelty and profound kindness. Throughout these hours, the town itself seemed to be caught in a delicate balancing act, teetering between the familiar comfort of its routines and the disruptive, unsettling force of a stray dog that had challenged its very core. Each person, whether drawn into the intimate circle of personal interaction or caught up in the broader discourse of civic duty, was inexorably affected by the events that had unfolded. The stray's journey, marked by moments of raw, unfiltered reality, had become a powerful catalyst for introspection, a force that compelled everyone to ask difficult questions about the nature of justice, the responsibilities of society, and the fragile beauty of human connection. In the quiet pre-dawn hours, as the first pale hints of light began to dissolve the darkness, the stray found itself once more at the edge of the park. Here, in the gentle embrace of nature's awakening, the dog paused to survey its surroundings, a mosaic of worn paths, dew-laden grass, and the distant murmur of a town slowly stirring to life. In that tender moment of stillness, the stray's journey intertwined with the collective heartbeat of the community. Its passage through the day had not been a mere interruption, but rather a profound commentary on the tenuous boundaries between order and chaos, compassion and indifference. The town, now steeped in the reflective quiet of early morning, held within it the seeds of a transformation that had been quietly set in motion. Each face that had witnessed the stray's silent rebellion bore the imprint of that encounter, a subtle shift in perspective, a newfound willingness to question the status quo. And as the stray, with its resilient spirit and unyielding determination, began to move forward into the uncertain light of a new day, it carried with it the hope of a community on the cusp of rediscovering its lost empathy, a hope that, in time, might bridge the gap between the harsh realities of life and the gentle promise of renewal. The new day broke with a reluctant light, as if the sun itself hesitated to fully expose the raw, unguarded truths that had emerged the night before. In the dim corridors of the courthouse, Judge Whitaker sat at his desk long after the building had emptied, the silence around him heavy with the residue of yesterday's upheaval. His mind, once a fortress of routine and legal absolutes, now trembled with a strange mixture of doubt and longing. The stray's audacious incursion had not only unsettled the proceedings but had begun to unravel the tightly wound threads of his lifelong commitment to an order that, until now, had seemed infallible. In the early hours, when the world was still draped in the soft shadows of memory and uncertainty, the judge's thoughts wandered back to a time when justice was not an abstract construct but a deeply human pursuit. He recalled the teachings of his mentor, a man whose words had often echoed in the quiet chambers of his heart, that true justice required empathy as much as it demanded strict adherence to the letter of the law. As he slowly flipped through the pages of old case files, a sense of urgency overtook him, the realization that the day's earlier events might be the catalyst for a profound, albeit painful, metamorphosis in the very heart of his community. Beyond the courthouse walls, the town was awakening to a reality subtly transformed. In the modest neighborhood where the stray had shared tender moments with the grieving woman, life was beginning to mirror the fractured beauty of that unexpected encounter. Neighbors exchanged soft greetings and wistful smiles over freshly painted fences, each one silently acknowledging that something essential had shifted. There was an unspoken pact now, an awareness that the boundaries between duty and compassion, between the rigid and the tender, were not as impermeable as once believed. In a small, cluttered apartment above a row of shuttered shops on Main Street, the local journalist, whose pen had danced feverishly over countless pages in search of truth, sat before a window streaked with the gentle rain of early spring. The steady drip of water against the glass seemed to punctuate her every thought, as if the sky itself were murmuring secrets of redemption and quiet revolt. Her notebook lay open, filled with scribbles that captured not just the facts of the day but the textures of emotion and memory that had interwoven themselves into the fabric of the town. Each word she wrote carried the weight of a community on the precipice of change, a tapestry of lives suddenly united by an act of unexpected defiance. Elsewhere, in the narrow, lamplit streets that had cradled the stray's nocturnal wanderings, an air of introspection settled over a local diner. The young waitress, whose eyes had earlier met the soulful gaze of the stray, now moved with a deliberate grace that hinted at inner transformation. Her routine tasks, pouring coffee, wiping down tables, took on a new significance, as if each act of service was a quiet rebellion against the indifference that had long governed her world. The customers, too, seemed to sense the shift. Regular conversations about weather and trivial news were gradually giving way to deeper reflections, as patrons shared fleeting glances of mutual understanding, a silent acknowledgement that life was far more intricate and vulnerable than the rigid schedules and customary routines allowed. As midday approached, a subtle but unmistakable ripple of change spread through the town's institutions. At the local community center, where elderly citizens gathered to reminisce about days gone by, discussions turned toward the nature of justice and the unseen wounds that every citizen carried. The stray's disruptive act had, in its quiet way, laid bare the hidden sorrows and unspoken hopes of a community that had long taken its routines for granted. In animated, hushed tones, the residents debated the possibility that the legal system, once revered as an unyielding beacon of order, might need to bend, if only slightly, to accommodate the messy, heart-wrenching realities of life. In the midst of these reflections, a new character emerged, a man known to the town as Mr. Ellison, a retired detective whose life had been devoted to unraveling the secrets of the human condition. Mr. Ellison had spent years patrolling the dimly lit streets and quiet alleys of the neighborhood, witnessing firsthand the struggles of those who had been forgotten by a system designed to reward conformity. Drawn by the murmurs of change, he now found himself revisiting the courthouse, a place he had once viewed with a mixture of respect and suspicion. As he walked through the marble halls, his weathered eyes took in the subtle alterations in the air, the lingering echoes of voices filled with tentative hope and quiet defiance. Outside, the stray moved with an unhurried grace, its steps measured as though it, too, sensed the gravity of the day. It passed by an old mural on the side of a building, a faded depiction of a bygone era when the town had been united by a sense of shared purpose and collective struggle. The mural, once vibrant with the colors of hope and determination, now stood as a silent testament to the passing of time and the erosion of communal bonds. Yet, in that very erosion lay the seeds of renewal, for the stray's presence had rekindled a spark of remembrance among those who still believed in the possibility of transformation. In the courthouse's dusty corridors, Judge Whitaker found himself compelled to take a solitary walk, a journey that led him through dimly lit passageways and forgotten rooms where echoes of past deliberations lingered like ghosts. Each step was a measured act of rebellion against the complacency that had long defined his existence. He recalled the furtive smiles of the jurors, the tentative nods of the attorneys, and even the hesitant, almost imperceptible sighs of the stenographer, all moments that had, collectively, whispered of a deeper truth, that even the most institutionalized systems were vulnerable to the tender incursion of human emotion. As the judge emerged into the cool embrace of the late afternoon, he was greeted by the sight of a weathered park bench beneath a canopy of autumn-kissed trees. Here, in the interplay of sunlight and shadow, he allowed himself a moment of quiet introspection. The stray had long since vanished into the labyrinth of the town streets, but its impact lingered like a delicate perfume, a reminder that chaos, in its purest form, carried with it the potential for rebirth. In that silent reverie, the judge made a promise to himself that the rigid edifice of justice would, henceforth, be tempered by compassion, and that no matter how impervious the system might seem, the soft pulse of empathy could always find a way in. Across town, as the evening sun dipped below the horizon, the streets came alive with an undercurrent of subdued celebration. In homes and local gatherings alike, conversations flowed with an energy that was both tentative and exhilarating, a shared recognition that life was a tapestry woven from threads of sorrow, resilience, and the unexpected beauty of human connection. The stray, a mere fleeting presence in the grand scheme of things, had become an unlikely muse for those seeking to reclaim the lost art of living with passion and empathy. In quiet corners of the community center, beneath flickering fluorescent lights, elderly residents recounted tales of yesteryear, stories of hardships endured, of love found and lost, and of a time when justice was not merely a word but a living, breathing ideal. Their voices, frail yet determined, mingled with a low hum of conversation as they discussed the possibility of reimagining the systems that governed their lives. The idea was radical in its simplicity, to allow a measure of humanity to seep into the cold, unyielding mechanisms of power. And as these conversations took root, the stray's act of unintentional rebellion became a symbol, a rallying cry for those who believed that the law, for all its might and rigidity, could be softened by the enduring strength of the human spirit. In the fading light of day, as shadows lengthened and the first stars began to pierce the twilight, the town found itself poised on the brink of transformation. Every whispered word, every tentative step taken in the wake of the stray's intrusion was imbued with a sense of possibility. The boundaries between the personal and the institutional, the ordinary and the extraordinary, began to blur. And in that liminal space, where the remnants of routine met the promise of change, the people of the town discovered that even the most unexpected events could kindle the flame of renewal. Thus, as the evening deepened and the town settled into a gentle, reflective hush, the echoes of a single, stray dog's courageous act continued to reverberate in every corner of the community. In the silent interplay of light and dark, of memory and hope, the inhabitants found themselves slowly, irrevocably transformed, a living testament to the idea that even in the face of overwhelming routine, the call to rediscover compassion can never be fully silenced. In the wake of that transformative evening, the town woke to a restless day where the unexpected consequences of the stray's intrusion rippled outward like echoes in a cavern. The courthouse, once a fortress of solemn duty, now seemed permeable, its walls softened by the lingering hum of change. Judge Whitaker, still haunted by the silent intensity of the previous night, arrived early that morning with a hesitant determination. In the quiet solitude of his office, he stared at the stacks of legal briefs and case files, wondering if the law could ever embrace the delicate uncertainties of human compassion. His thoughts turned to the stray, the creature whose unbidden presence had shaken the rigid foundations of justice, and he felt compelled to revisit the proceedings of that fateful day with fresh eyes, searching for ways to blend empathy with tradition. As he stepped out into the corridor, the judge encountered Mr. Ellison again, the retired detective whose measured gaze had long witnessed the undercurrents of the town. The two men exchanged a few thoughtful words in hushed tones near the polished wooden doors. Mr. Ellison's weathered features bore a quiet smile, a rare expression that hinted at the possibility of redemption for institutions that had grown too distant from the human experience. Sometimes, Mr. Ellison remarked softly, it takes a stray to remind us of the imperfections we all share. The judge nodded, his heart heavy with unspoken memories and a newfound resolve to temper the severity of the law with the unpredictable pulse of life. Outside the courthouse, the streets bore the soft scars of recent rain, each glistening puddle reflecting the diffuse light of a reluctant sun. In the local park, a verdant haven edged by ancient trees and winding paths, the stray had left its mark in a different manner. It had become a quiet wanderer among the dew-laden grass, its presence an invitation to those who sought solace in nature. At the park's edge, the young man who had once shared a silent conversation with the dog now strolled slowly, as if searching for answers in the rustle of the leaves. He recalled that earlier moment beneath the gnarled oak, where the shared silence had spoken volumes about isolation and hope. Now, as he walked, he allowed the gentle murmur of the morning to soothe the ache of his inner turmoil, pondering whether the stray's unforeseen journey had been a catalyst for his own quiet transformation. Meanwhile, the local journalist continued to dig deeper into the unfolding story. Sequestered in her modest apartment, she meticulously organized her notes and interviews, determined to capture the full spectrum of emotions that had swept through the community. Her pen danced across pages, recording testimonies from courthouse workers, everyday citizens, and even those who had long since withdrawn into their private sorrows. In one interview with an elderly resident at the community center, she learned of a time when the town's spirit was nourished by shared hardships and communal dreams, a time now obscured by bureaucratic indifference. The interviewee's trembling voice and earnest eyes recounted memories of neighborhood gatherings and the comforting sound of laughter that once filled the air. The journalist's heart stirred with the realization that the stray had become a symbol of the forgotten voices, a reminder that even in a system ruled by cold logic, there lay stories of tenderness and resilience waiting to be rediscovered. As the day advanced, the town seemed to brace itself for another unexpected turn. The quiet rhythms of daily life, children on their way to school, shopkeepers opening their stores, and the familiar hum of conversation in local diners, were now punctuated by an undercurrent of anticipation and uncertainty. Rumors began to circulate that the courthouse might reconsider certain cases with a more humane perspective, spurred by the collective yearning for a justice system that acknowledged the frailty of its participants. In hushed discussions around water coolers and in the whispered confidences of close friends, the incident with the stray was recounted with an almost mythic quality, a moment when the mundane had collided with the extraordinary, forever altering the fabric of the town. On the periphery of these shifts, a small but determined group of citizens gathered at the community center that very afternoon. In a room once reserved for routine meetings and bureaucratic updates, they convened to discuss the possibility of reform, a reimagining of the local justice system that could incorporate compassion as a fundamental tenet. Their conversation was animated yet measured, charged with the kind of raw energy that emerges only when hearts are laid bare. Among them was a young lawyer, whose own experiences of systemic neglect had driven her to advocate for the vulnerable. She argued passionately that the stray's incursion had been more than an anomaly, it was a wake-up call that demanded the merging of legal precision with human empathy. Her words, laced with conviction and sorrow, resonated with those around her, stirring a resolve to challenge the status quo and usher in an era where laws might bend to the realities of life, if only a little. In another quiet corner of the town, the stray's fate took an unexpected turn. Wandering past the familiar boundaries of the park, it found refuge in a modest shelter, a small, run-down building on the outskirts where a handful of kind souls cared for abandoned animals. There, amidst the muted clatter of other rescued lives, the dog received gentle hands and a temporary haven. The shelter's caretaker, a soft-spoken woman whose own story was marked by loss and recovery, recognized in the stray a kindred spirit, a creature that had survived the harshness of neglect yet carried an unyielding spark of resilience. She treated the animal with a tenderness that bordered on reverence, knowing that even the smallest acts of kindness could heal wounds inflicted by a world that often turned a blind eye to suffering. In that humble setting, the stray's battered form began to show signs of recovery, a physical echo of the emotional healing that had started to permeate the community. Back in the heart of the town, as twilight began to steal over the day, the judge returned to his chambers with a quiet determination. The events of the past few days had compelled him to re-examine his long-held beliefs about justice. Alone in the silence of his study, he penned a letter, a tentative proposal to a group of trusted colleagues and community leaders. In the letter, he advocated for a pilot program that would allow for more restorative practices in certain cases, where the focus would shift from mere punishment to healing and understanding. His words, deliberate and imbued with a personal vulnerability, were an acknowledgement that the rigid frameworks of the past could no longer adequately serve a community that was beginning to rediscover the forgotten art of compassion. It was a call to arms of sorts, a challenge to the entrenched ways of thinking that had long dictated the flow of justice. The reverberations of his proposal were felt almost immediately. A small, diverse coalition of officials, activists, and ordinary citizens rallied around the idea, united by the belief that the stray's unplanned disruption had revealed a profound truth, that the system itself could be transformed by the infusion of empathy. Late into the night, in the softly lit meeting rooms of the community center, plans were drawn, debates were held, and tentative steps were taken towards what many hoped would be a more humane future. The atmosphere was charged with a sense of urgency, a recognition that moments of collective vulnerability, though fleeting, had the power to rewrite the rules of engagement between the individual and the institution. Outside, as the town settled into a fragile lull, the stray, now a symbol of resilience, stirred restlessly in its shelter. Its eyes, dark and soulful, seemed to hold a quiet intelligence, as though it comprehended the far-reaching impact of its inadvertent rebellion. In the soft murmur of the night and the distant sounds of renewed conversations in the streets, there lay an unspoken promise, that from the depths of unexpected chaos, something enduring and transformative could emerge. In the days that followed, the town continued to grapple with the profound implications of that singular, disquieting event. Each citizen, in their own way, was compelled to confront the paradoxes of a life governed by rules yet yearning for understanding. The once impenetrable facade of the courthouse, the sterile rhythm of daily routines, and the detached nature of legal proceedings were all subtly reconfigured by the echoes of one stray dog's presence. As the community collectively inched toward a new horizon, the lines between order and disorder, between duty and mercy, began to blur, leaving behind a landscape where the scars of the past coexisted with the tender shoots of future hope. And so, as dusk gave way to the deep blue of night, the town stood at the threshold of a quiet revolution, a revolution not fought with grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, but with the humble, determined act of opening one's heart. The stray, whose journey had woven itself into the very fabric of the community, remained a silent testament to the idea that even in the midst of routine and despair, a single act of defiance could ignite a spark of change. In the delicate interplay of shadows and light, in whispered promises and tentative plans for reform, the legacy of that tumultuous day began to take shape, a legacy built not on the cold mechanics of justice, but on the vibrant, unyielding pulse of human compassion. As autumn's chill deepened into an unyielding winter, the town seemed to stand on the threshold of a new era, a silent, measured revolution born from that fateful day when a stray dog had unwittingly unraveled the tightly wound fabric of routine and authority. In the days that followed the impromptu disruption at the courthouse, the community's pulse quickened with an urgency that belied its outward calm. In the corridors of power and in the quiet alcoves of ordinary life, an undercurrent of transformation took root, nurtured by the memories of a moment that had shattered expectations and redrawn the lines between duty and empathy. Judge Whittaker, his hand still trembling from the weight of his own vulnerability, began to see the law not merely as a series of rigid dictates, but as a living institution, capable of learning from its own imperfections. Each morning, as he walked the familiar marble corridors of the courthouse, he carried with him the memory of the stray's wide, imploring eyes, a reminder that even in a system built on order, the human heart could not be ignored. In his private study, surrounded by the worn leather-bound volumes of legal precedents and the quiet hum of his old desk lamp, he pored over the proposals for reform. His letter, once a tentative plea for a justice that acknowledged the messy truths of life, had sparked fervent debate among his colleagues and community leaders alike. In hushed boardrooms and lively town hall meetings, ideas were exchanged with the hope that the new vision might temper punishment with understanding and retribution with restorative care. Across town, the local journalist found herself inundated with interviews, testimonies, and raw emotions. Her typewriter clattered day and night as she distilled the myriad voices of the community into a narrative that was as unvarnished as it was compelling. She spoke with the elderly resident from the community center, whose reminiscences of better days evoked both a deep melancholy and a fragile hope. She recorded the whispered confessions of a shopkeeper who had lost his way in a system that seemed to value rules over people, and the resolute assertions of a young lawyer whose passion for justice was fueled by personal loss. In every story, the echo of the stray dog's unbidden entrance into the courthouse reverberated, a symbol of life's unyielding insistence on breaking through even the most carefully constructed facades. At the community center, the coalition that had gathered to discuss reform began to crystallize its vision for change. In one long, rain-soaked evening, under the flickering lights of a modest meeting room, the group sat in a semicircle around a battered table. The atmosphere was charged with a mix of hope and apprehension. There was an unspoken understanding that the discussions would not be easy. Decades of entrenched systems and hardened attitudes were not easily dismantled. Yet, each voice carried the weight of lived experience, a series of small, determined acts of kindness that had accumulated into a powerful demand for a justice system that recognized the dignity of every life, human or otherwise. Mr. Ellison, the retired detective whose steady gaze had once catalogued the town's darkest secrets, shared stories from his past encounters, tales of heartbreak and injustice that had long been buried beneath layers of bureaucratic routine. His voice, measured and resolute, recounted the silent suffering of those whose lives had been trampled by indifference. His words resonated deeply with the group, reminding them that the law, when divorced from empathy, could become as cold and unforgiving as the winter winds that now swept the town's streets. In his measured tone, there was an invitation to look beyond the text of statutes and to see the human stories that lay hidden beneath every case file. Meanwhile, in the quiet sanctuary of a small animal shelter on the outskirts of town, the stray dog, now given a temporary refuge, began its own journey toward healing. The shelter, modest and often overlooked, was run by a compassionate woman whose soft-spoken resilience had earned her the trust of many lost souls, both human and animal. Every morning, as the first light filtered through grimy windows, she would gently wash the dog's matted fur and offer it a morsel of food, her eyes brimming with unspoken understanding. The stray, whose life had been a series of harsh encounters and fleeting moments of kindness, seemed to respond with a quiet dignity. Its eyes, once wild and untrusting, now carried a glimmer of hope, a testament to the transformative power of care and compassion. In the sanctuary's small courtyard, other rescued animals stirred in a chorus of tentative greetings, their shared existence a quiet rebellion against a world that had long seemed indifferent to their suffering. Back in the heart of the courthouse, Judge Whitaker's inner transformation reached a quiet climax. In one particularly reflective moment, he stood before a mirror in his private office, the faded light of dusk casting long shadows across his face. The image that stared back at him was one marked by the passage of time and the burden of duty, a man whose eyes held a secret sorrow but also a new determination. With a measured breath, he resolved to champion the pilot program for restorative justice that had been brewing in those late-night hours. This program, he believed, could be the spark that ignited a broader reform, a way to intertwine the precision of law with the unpredictable beauty of human compassion. His proposal, written in careful, deliberate lines, was to be presented at the next gathering of local officials, a gathering that promised to be as contentious as it was hopeful. In the days that followed, as winter's first true frost began to lace the edges of every window, the community's transformation became visible in subtle but significant ways. The storefronts, once draped in the grey monotony of routine, now displayed small signs of revival, a mural here, a community notice board there, each piece a silent testament to a newfound belief in renewal. In the quiet hum of early morning markets, conversations had taken on a warmer tone, as neighbors spoke not only of the weather but of the shared trials and triumphs that bound them together. Even the courthouse, an edifice that had long symbolized unyielding authority, seemed to exude a gentler air, its stone steps bathed in the soft glow of street lamps that now lit the paths of reform. The local journalist's article, when it finally appeared in the town's modest newspaper, was met with both admiration and controversy. Its words, raw and unfiltered, recounted the day of the stray's intrusion with a literary grace that captured both the absurdity and the profundity of the event. Readers found themselves drawn into a narrative that was as much about the transformation of an institution as it was about the fragile beauty of everyday life. Letters poured in, expressions of gratitude, indignation, and a cautious optimism that perhaps, just perhaps, the rigid lines of the past could be redrawn. The story had become a touchstone, a mirror reflecting the collective heartache and hope of a community on the brink of rediscovery. On a particularly frigid evening, when the winds howled like distant memories through the empty streets, the Coalition for Reform convened one final time in the community center. In that cramped, warmly lit room, the diverse group of citizens, officials, and activists gathered around a makeshift table cluttered with documents, coffee cups, and the scattered remnants of last night's debates. The conversation that unfolded was both fierce and tender, a cacophony of ideas that ranged from radical visions to pragmatic steps forward. The young lawyer, whose impassioned speeches had already inspired many, proposed a series of workshops aimed at bridging the gap between the public and the justice system. These workshops were to be held not in sterile auditoriums, but in community halls where people could share their stories, their struggles, and their hopes for a better future. Every suggestion, no matter how small, was met with a mix of nods and murmurs, a silent, collective affirmation that the seeds of change had been sown. As the meeting drew to a close, a palpable sense of unity filled the room, a unity born not of grand declarations, but of the shared understanding that real change was rooted in the willingness to listen and to empathize. The proposals were set in motion, and over the following weeks, the town slowly began to see tangible signs of reform. the courthouse instituted a pilot program that allowed for mediation and restorative practices in select cases, and the local government set aside funds to support community outreach programs designed to heal the wounds inflicted by a system that had long prioritized order over humanity. In the midst of these institutional changes, life continued its gentle, relentless march. The stray dog, whose journey had been the inadvertent catalyst for so much transformation, found itself gradually recovering at the shelter. On crisp mornings, as the caretaker led it out into the light for brief, tentative walks, the animal's once guarded eyes now shone with a quiet acceptance. It had become a silent ambassador for all those whose voices had been drowned out by the clamor of routine, a living reminder that even the most unlikely encounters could spark a change that reverberated far beyond the immediate moment. Months later, as the town settled into the slow rhythms of winter, the echoes of that single, extraordinary event continued to influence the lives of its citizens. Judge Whitaker, now a reluctant but determined advocate for reform, often found himself pausing before a case to reflect on the human stories behind the legal arguments. His once impenetrable facade had softened into one that resonated with empathy, and in his measured judgments there was a newfound awareness of the delicate interplay between law and life. He walked the halls of the courthouse with a quiet humility, his eyes occasionally lingering on the faded mural outside, a mural that had been repainted in vibrant hues by local artists as a tribute to the day when order met chaos and compassion reigned supreme. At the same time, the community center became a hub of activity and healing. Workshops, support groups, and open forums were held regularly, each one a testament to the collective desire to rebuild not just a legal system, but a community. Neighbors who had once exchanged only perfunctory greetings now gathered over shared meals, their conversations weaving together the threads of personal experience and communal memory. In these gatherings, the story of the stray dog was recounted with reverence, a parable of disruption and renewal that transcended mere legal reform to touch the very essence of what it meant to be human. The local journalist, whose words had once stirred the town into action, continued to chronicle the evolution of her community. Her subsequent articles focused on the tangible changes in the courthouse, the heartfelt testimonials from citizens, and the subtle yet profound shift in the town's collective consciousness. Her writing, now infused with a quiet optimism, served as both a record and an inspiration, a reminder that even in the midst of routine and hardship, the seeds of transformation could blossom if nurtured with care. In one final, symbolic moment that encapsulated the profound journey of the past months, the town held a small ceremony at the refurbished courthouse steps. Under a sky heavy with winter's promise, community leaders, citizens, and even the caretaker from the animal shelter gathered to commemorate the day when a stray dog had reminded them all of their shared humanity. There were no grand speeches, only a gentle acknowledgement of the path that had been forged in the crucible of unexpected events. As the ceremony drew to a close, the judge himself stepped forward, his voice steady yet imbued with a deep-seated emotion. He spoke of the importance of compassion, of the need to listen to the silent cries that often go unnoticed, and of the enduring hope that change, however incremental, could transform lives. In that moment, as the gathered crowd stood in quiet reflection, the stray dog, now fully recovered and adopted by a kind family, passed by the courthouse one last time. Its presence was subtle, almost like a shadow of the past, yet it carried with it the legacy of a time when the ordinary was forever altered by the extraordinary. The town, forever changed by that single act of unbidden defiance, moved forward with a renewed commitment to justice, empathy, and the belief that even the most unassuming of lives could spark a revolution in the hearts of many. Thus, as winter gradually yielded to the tentative light of early spring, the legacy of that tumultuous day continued to resonate. The courthouse, the community center, the small animal shelter, and every corner of the town bore the indelible mark of transformation, a mark that served as a constant reminder of the delicate balance between order and compassion. In every measured step, every quiet conversation, and every act of kindness, the spirit of that stray dog lived on, a silent, enduring testament to the transformative power of empathy in a world that so often forgets to listen. And so, the story that had begun with a shocking intrusion in a place of rigid authority evolved into a living parable, a narrative woven from the threads of despair, hope, and the relentless pursuit of a justice that acknowledged the full spectrum of human emotion. In the subtle interplay of light and shadow, in the whispered promises of reform and the tender bonds formed in unexpected places, the town discovered that true change does not come from grand proclamations or forceful interventions, but from the quiet courage to reimagine a world where every life, no matter how small or stray, is valued and heard.